Investing in the technology space, I'm an entrepreneur and investor over the last 20 years in Silicon Valley. And within the area of IT, it has for the last 10, 15 years in the US and in the world been extremely centered on Silicon Valley. I think that there's sort of a lot of reasons for that, but the question is, where's the growth going to happen in the next 10 years? And what I would tend to think is that it will be more diversified from just Silicon Valley. There was something very paradoxical about it all being in Silicon Valley, because after all, these internet companies are global in scope. They can be built anywhere. You just need some talented people, some capital, the right governance structures. And so it was always this very odd question why all the companies of this new global technology were built in one specific place called Silicon Valley. And I think the answers for that had to do with network effects and knowledge and role models. But I think at this point, I would bet on places outside of Silicon Valley. The one big place outside of Silicon Valley over the last few years has been China, where there have been some spectacular companies started. And I think the question is where else one might look, and I don't think there's a single other place. It's not a specific city or specific country, but I think in general there's much opportunity outside of Silicon Valley.
I want to talk to you about really industries and sectors that you find interesting, because when you first founded PayPal, we were in a different time. Today, we're talking about data, we're talking about the cloud, we're talking about digitizing our life, and technology is the underpinning of every industry, whether it's driverless cars or collecting data. So zero in for us on industries. Where are you finding opportunity to invest in industry?
I'm always uncomfortable with the theme question. So I think there are all sorts of trends in technology, and I'd be happy to talk about them. But I think they're often difficult as a venture capital investor. So the trends are often the buzzwords. So they're buzzwords like SaaS software, cloud computing, big data, virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence. We've all heard these buzzwords, and even though these trends may or may not happen, as investments, they're often very dangerous. And so when you hear these buzzwords, you often should just run away as fast as you can, because it's often an indication that the specifics have not been thought through carefully enough. And so what I think what I think of investing in is never invest in trends or things like that, but always invest in specific companies. And what I try to find are unique companies that are doing something that can't be done anywhere else, and where it's this is sort of a one of a kind in the world. And whereas if it's a trend, there are many of that kind, which means there are many competitors and they're somewhat undifferentiated.
That's a fair point. So, can you give us some examples?
Well, certainly, and people, well, for example, Airbnb, SpaceX, Facebook earlier on were investments I made, and each of these companies you can describe them as part of a trend, the sharing economy or social networking for Facebook. But that's a misleading way to describe it. It was much better to think of them as solving a very specific problem. So Airbnb was sort of a hotel room substitute. It's not the sharing economy abstraction, it's the hotel room substitute. It's the only company that's doing that on a worldwide scale, and that makes it a one-of-a-kind company. Facebook somehow figured out real identity. There were a lot of people doing social networking in one form or another. Facebook was is the one company that really cracked real identity. People are not interested in networking. One of my friends started a company in 1997, Reid Hoffman, who ended up starting LinkedIn, 7 years before Facebook. The company was called SocialNet. They had social networking in the name of the company 7 years before Facebook, and they wanted to do abstract networking in virtual cyberspace. And some people would pretend they were dogs, and other people would pretend they were cats, and you had these virtual dogs and virtual cats talking to one another. Turned out, no, that's not what people are interested in. They're not interested in abstract networking. They're interested in real identity. And Facebook was the first one to crack that and have something. So it's often even defining what these companies are doing correctly so that you can identify what the one-of-a-kind things are. But I always prefer, a bottom-up approach. You meet with, the entrepreneurs. You try to think hard about the technology, about the business opportunity, and then it's the ones that are different, that don't fit into any good categories, that are the great ones. And that's something like that's been true. And then when we've invested in trends, which we've occasionally done, that's often been much more treacherous, where even if the trend happens, that means you've glossed over details of the specific technology, the specific business, and you've abstracted away too many of the important details.
So it's a really smart approach that you bring up.